So this video is primarily going to be about Apple, and I'm dividing it up into two major topics. The first is my thoughts on the iPad Pro after 3 months of use, particularly in the classroom, which is why I put it on my wish list this past holiday season, and also my thoughts on the March 21st Apple event. So, like I said, I've had the iPad Pro for 3 months now. The things that I like about it, to start with, the screen. The screen is really easy to see in the zoomed in view, and if I need to use the built-in magnifier, it actually works a lot like a mouse, to be honest. You can use the cursor to move like a joystick to move yourself around, so it's really, really nice. So that's one of the positives. Another positive is that it's got great speakers for things like listening to my National Library Service books. This has negated the need completely for the National Library Service player that they issue to patrons. I only hung on to that because of the loud and punchy speaker, and now with the iPad Pro, don't need it anymore. Although I think I'll hang on to it primarily for backup purposes. And also, while we're on this here, excuse me, this is an example of low vision, of an app for somebody with low vision or blindness. I'm a patron of the National Library Service, and I'm also a subscriber to Bookshare.org, and both of those are very well handled, utilizing apps that are available in the App Store for the iPad. So that's another plus. So those are three positives. Three negatives. I have the keyboard cover, and it's a great little keyboard. I got this cover because I wanted an integrated solution so I wouldn't have to worry about pairing via Bluetooth. Because in my experience, if there was a gap between when you had to take notes and when you had to take more notes, say in the middle of a discussion, I found that with Bluetooth, oftentimes the connection would go to sleep and sometimes would not repair. I have a $10 Bluetooth keyboard that I got last year primarily as an experiment, just to see how the device would handle a keyboard. Little did I know I would be using that to take notes in class. So that's a Bluetooth keyboard. So I wanted something more integrated, and the choices at the moment are between either the Smart Cover or the Logitech Pro case. And the Logitech Pro case, to me, was a bit too bulky. Yes, it had the additional keys. Yes, it was backlit, but to me, it just added too much unnecessary weight. And for somebody who's used to carrying around large print textbooks, that's the last feeling I wanted to have again after 10 years. But the one issue that I ran into with the keyboard is that it's noisy. It's not terribly so. I mean, nobody will be staring at you, but you have to be very conscious about how you hit the keys, because otherwise, to quote my girlfriend, it'll sound like you're building a house. It's probably the most unique way I've ever heard to describe typing on a keyboard, but there you go. And negative number 3 is the biggest one for me, and that is no dedicated file manager within iOS. This one primarily is a software problem, and I hope that Apple introduces this and addresses this shortcoming in iOS 10 with, say, a traditional Finder app. The problem is, I got the iPad to be a portable solution as a supplement to my iMac. Little did I know I would be on the road recently for family-related issues, and I immediately began to realize that if I had to turn something in, I couldn't, because you can view and you can open files in specific apps, but you cannot, or at least I've not tried to, I'm pretty sure you can't, upload directly from the SanDisk app to Web Campus, because that requires a web browser, and in the open file in dialog, Web Campus or Blackboard in my case is not an option. So that's a major shortcoming. The other problem is downloading files directly to the drive. Now, a lot of files will open just fine in Safari, and I could utilize the web browser in VoiceStream and open a file in there. But at the same time, the options are still limited. It's because of the sandboxing system that Apple has put in place, which is to say, let's say you have a plastic tub of water, and into this tub you put a boat. And you have another plastic tub, and into that tub you put some water and a boat. And you don't fill either of these all the way full. Okay, you fill them, say, a quarter of the way full. This is to demonstrate that if these boats were real, the drivers could not get out of their boats, climb the sides of the containers, and hop into each other's tanks at will. You would have to purposefully build a passage between them. And that passage, in terms of iOS, is limited. Now, for most day-to-day tasks, that's fine. But with Apple claiming that the iPad Pro can replace a laptop and not have a native file management solution, I think is a major shortcoming. Now, a lot of people will say, well, you could just use the cloud. What if you're working with data that is highly sensitive? For instance, what if you're working with student IEP documents? What if you're working with somebody's personal, let's say you're a tax broker and you're working with somebody's personal information there? Those are very high security risk items that are too dangerous to be placed into the cloud. And of course, I am not going to be uploading any personal government-related documents to the cloud. It's just silly, because what if that cloud gets hacked, as we've already seen on multiple occasions? And it's interesting because obviously Windows has had a file manager since birth, but Windows is now available on tablets, so you have a tablet with a full file management system. And Android even has a full file management system built into it. So I think it's rather silly that iOS doesn't have it. This alone is the biggest negative of the iPad Pro, and I think the main reason why I didn't see any iPad Pros recently either at my university or while I was away tending to what I needed to tend to. Instead, I saw at least 3 Surfaces, maybe more that I wasn't aware of were around me, but I'm seeing more Surfaces than I'm seeing iPads. Okay? And I think that the biggest shortcoming, again, is a native Finder-esque solution. Now, a lot of people are saying, well, you could just use an app. Again, we go back to that 2 boats in 2 separate tubs analogy. It's not cross compatible. There are limitations in iOS. And as I said, for most part, that's fine. But there are occasions when you need more power. Another interesting shortcoming. Now, I've already talked to AI Squared about this. They're the makers of the software you see in front of you. It's called Zoomtext. And I've got Zoomtext running here on the Macintosh as well. I can go into folders. You see I've got a highlight here. I've got cursor enhancement. I can have speech on demand.
Apple.
Okay. I have cursor. I've got a cursor that follows me. These are just simple enhancements that, and I've also got the readers that I've shown you on multiple occasions in the videos. These are things that some people without vision loss may not understand, but these are things that honestly make a big difference in the production workflow of somebody who's blind. Now, I made a mention earlier that iOS does have Zoom, but it doesn't have any of the enhancements that Zoomtext has. And as I said a moment ago, I already talked to AI Squared. They said that they've already been considering, and in fact are more than likely still considering, the possibility of putting Zoomtext onto an iOS device or an Android device. Now, it's already available on a Windows tablet because a Windows tablet is a Windows tablet, is a Windows PC, is a Windows Tower, is a Windows laptop. You get the idea. Windows is Windows is Windows. Now, obviously, you have to have a system with the right specs, but you can get a tablet that runs this kind of software. But at the same time, if you're anxious about not wanting to use Windows, let's say you've got too much invested in iOS, this again shows the limitations of your options. And as a result of the iPad Pro. So the iPad Pro is not bad, but to have Tim Cook state that it could replace a laptop was a bit of a stretch. In my view, if you're going to say it can replace a laptop, then that means you can give me a native file manager and a way to run this kind of software. Now, they did say that the reason it can't right now is because of hardware limitations. I'm sure that those will be rectified in the future as time moves on. The file manager could be updated in software. But if Apple's going to continue this push to the cloud, then where does that leave people that prefer, like myself, to... I will use the cloud, but I do prefer to work with native storage drives like my SanDisk iXpand, because if I needed to access a document and all of a sudden the web goes out and I'm in a critical time crunch, see where I'm going? So, I think the iPad Pro could certainly benefit from all of these enhancements that I'm suggesting. Do I regret buying it? Nah. Nope. It's a great device for consuming media and for taking notes. Excuse me. And like I said, I do export my notes to Google Drive. But if you're going to say, again, that it can replace a laptop, give it the file manager, give it... I don't know if I want to say the ability to run Zoomtext, but maybe something a little bit more lightweight along the lines of that. Because VoiceStream Reader can handle your reading duties. It's got a built-in web browser and it can read all your talking books. But things like cursor enhancement are a big plus in my book that I'd like to see come to the iPad. Make it happen, Apple. So those are my thoughts on the iPad. Now let's shift gears a little bit to the March 21st event. They introduced the iPhone SE. The iPhone SE is an iPhone 5S exterior with an iPhone 6S interior. And it seems, interestingly enough, that Apple has done some research and there is a market for the smaller iPhone. They spent... Now, I must stress that I have not seen the keynote yet. I only just got back from my trip yesterday. And I haven't seen the keynote yet. But from what I understand, they were talking about India a lot. They are looking at developing markets. But interestingly enough, I do watch an Indian-centric tech channel, Gadgets to Use. And they were talking about this on that channel, and what they said was that for the price of an iPhone 5S, or iPhone SE, you could buy a baseline iPhone 6. So it's that alone remains. It's going to be interesting to see how well the device sells. The other thing to consider is the fact that a lot of people, including myself, have gotten used to phablets over the years. Devices like the Galaxy Note series, the LG G series, even Apple's own iPhone 6s and 6s Plus and 6 and 6 Plus are considered, the 6 Plus in particular and 6s Plus are considered phablets. And I can tell you from a personal standpoint that I could not see myself going back to that smaller display, not just because of my vision problems, but also because of the form factor. I've gotten used to these big phones, and to go back to the older design, I think would be a real adjustment, especially considering the keyboard would be more cramped. So there's the iPhone SE. They introduced a 9.7-inch iPad Pro to replace the iPad Air. Pretty much the same specs, although as I understand it, the device is a little bit slower than its 12-inch counterpart. Again, we do go back to the shortcomings that I addressed earlier on in the video with my own iPad Pro. Again, I think that Apple needs to give us a file manager. They need to ramp up the accessibility with some cursor enhancements, maybe work with AI Squared to develop a Zoomtext port for iOS. And again, this is just my personal wish list as far as Zoomtext goes, but I can tell you that I'm sure more than one person has desired a file manager out of iOS aside from these secluded apps that really don't do much. The interesting part that I found, though, is I'm interested in seeing how the smart keyboard will perform, because for the most part it's full size, but they did have to shrink a few of the keys down, which is interesting considering that Apple has always managed to put a full-sized, full key size typing experience into things like the 12-inch PowerBook G4 from back in the day. Of course, now you're working with a 9.7-inch screen, so obviously they had to make sacrifices. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out. But also, True Tone Flash. I have not seen a single person out and about taking pictures with an iPad. The only possible benefit goes back to that Zoomtext market that I was talking about a moment ago. What would be really cool is if they could not only port Zoomtext over, but using the cameras integrate the image reader into the iPad itself. For those of you who do not know, the image reader basically is a third-party camera solution that allows you to put a piece of printed text onto a pad, click a button, and the software will read hard copy documents to you. It'd be nice to see that on the iPad Pro, especially since the 9.7-inch now has the flash. But aside from that very specific, very niche application, why do we have it? You know? Because I've not seen a single person, not one, take a picture with an iPad. Not to mention they managed to have the camera stick out like a sore thumb. So I don't know, but I can tell you one thing. I don't think your iPad 9.7-inch Air cases will work anymore. Maybe they will. Then we have the Apple Watch bands, plus the price drop. The price dropped to $299. In my opinion, it should have been that way from the beginning, and they should have dropped it to $249. The nylon bands are going to be interesting because, as I understand it, they're very soft, very comfortable, and it's great to see a more casual option for people that only want the Apple Watch Sport. Now, for those of you who do not know, if you're a new subscriber, I am looking at switching back to Android, so if I were to get a smartwatch, it would be something that is cross-platform. Unfortunately, the Apple Watch is not. This means that if I wanted to switch over to Android when my contract is up, the Apple Watch would be useless. and I really want to avoid that at all costs. But if I were to get an Apple Watch, I'd love to try on the nylon bands and see how they pan out. And like I said, the price drop should have been that price from the beginning. But the biggest disappointment, I think, and I'm not as I understand it, I'm not the only one who wasn't entirely happy with this event. Maybe it's just because of China leaking all the details before it comes, but it's like there were no surprises. There was no zing. It's just like they announced exactly what we were expecting. They didn't muddle it over, or try to. I'm sorry, they didn't try to hide anything. They did address, from what I understand in the iPad Pro 9.7-inch presentation, they addressed the PC market. And again, we go back to my prior point, and I apologize for bringing this up again and again, but honestly, it's true. Don't deny that you'd like to have a native Finder app in iOS. Although, and they were talking about how the PC market, why would anybody use a PC anymore? Well, again, file managers. In my case, native support for specialist applications that do what you need to get done. Another example of this is in my classes and in my doctoral program, we use a program to manipulate data called SPSS, which stands for Statistical Probabilities for the Social Sciences. It's been around forever. But there's no way to read SPSS files on iOS. The only way to run this at the moment is to utilize a Windows tablet and have it run both Zoomtext and SPSS. So these kinds of applications, I think, are what are barring the iPad Pro from becoming a true laptop replacement. I'd like to see, I'm hoping that this iPad Pro 9.7 inch is a sign of more productivity-focused iOS features to come in iOS 10. But those are my thoughts on the Apple event and on the iPad Pro 12.9 inch after 3 months. What do you guys think? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.